I got home just as the sun was dropping behind the trees in Red Willow Ridge, that quiet little HOA tucked outside a small Idaho mountain town. The moment I stepped inside, my emergency radio console started screaming at me, red alerts, dead channels, no signal, no backup. The kind of silence that makes your chest tighten before your brain can catch up. I didn't even take my boots off. I walked straight through the house and out back. That's when my stomach dropped. The long wire-ham radio antenna I had stretched between two pine trees was gone. Not sagging, not damaged by wind. Gone. The line had been cut clean through, the cable tossed onto the gravel like a message meant to be noticed. Then I heard slow clapping behind me. Standing in my driveway was Darlene Huxley, the new HOA board leader, smiling like she'd just solved a problem. She told me my ugly wire violated community standards and that she'd taken care of it herself. What she didn't understand was that the antenna she destroyed wasn't a hobby. It was part of a federally licensed emergency communication system. And when it went silent, it didn't just set off my alarms. It set off the wrong people's. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I should probably explain who I am, because none of this makes sense unless you understand why that antenna mattered in the first place. I'm Evan Cole, and radio isn't a hobby I picked up on weekends. I've been a licensed amateur radio operator for over a decade, holding an extra class license and volunteering with emergency response networks across rural Idaho. When storms knock out cell towers or wildfires tear through mountain passes, radios like mine become the last reliable line of communication. I've relayed evacuation orders, coordinated supply drops, and helped families find each other when every modern system failed. My setup was modest. No towering metal mast, no flashing lights, no noise. Just a thin, long wire antenna stretched carefully between two tall pine trees with a small vertical mount near the roofline. Most people never noticed it unless I pointed it out. The neighbors certainly never complained. That was intentional. Before I installed a single piece of equipment, I followed every rule I could find. I submitted detailed plans to the HOA Architectural Committee, complete with diagrams and photos. I explained the purpose of the antenna and how little visual impact it would have. Weeks later, I received written approval. I printed it. I saved it digitally. I backed it up twice. On top of that, I complied with federal accommodation laws designed to protect licensed emergency communications. Everything was documented. Everything was clean. For years, Red Willow Ridge was the definition of uneventful. The HOA existed mostly on paper. Meetings were short. Notices were rare. People waved at each other while walking dogs and minded their own business. It was exactly what I wanted when I bought the house. Then Darlene Huxley took control of the board. At first, it was subtle. A new tone in the community emails, a lot more bold text. Phrases like strict enforcement and restoring standards. She talked constantly about curb appeal and property values, even though nothing had changed in the neighborhood for years. Then the violations started. One neighbor was warned about the shade of beige on their fence. Another was cited for having a mailbox that leaned half an inch to the left. Someone else got a letter about unauthorized reflections from a window that caught the afternoon sun. People laughed it off at first. It felt petty, but harmless until it wasn't. One afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found a bright white envelope stamped Nutty, Oaf Violation. Inside was a single page accusing me of maintaining an unauthorized exterior structure inconsistent with community aesthetics. No photos, no measurements, no rule cited, just a demand that I correct the issue within 30 days or face fines. I knew immediately what she meant. The antenna, I wrote back calmly. I included copies of the architectural approval. I referenced the federal protections. I explained again what the antenna was used for and how it supported emergency services in the region. Her response came 2 days later. One short paragraph. She dismissed the approval as outdated. She dismissed federal law as irrelevant to private communities. And she informed me that the antenna needed to be removed. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. Over the next few weeks, the pressure increased. Follow-up letters arrived with sharper language. She CC'd other board members. Then she CC'd neighbors. She posted vague warnings on the HOA website about non-compliant installations threatening property values. No one confronted me directly. A few neighbors even apologized quietly, saying they knew it was nonsense but didn't want to get on her radar. I requested a meeting. I offered to walk her through the paperwork in person. I even suggested bringing in a county emergency coordinator to explain the importance of the system. She refused every offer. Instead, she sent a final notice stating that if the violation was not resolved, the HOA would take appropriate action to remedy the issue. No explanation of what that meant. No legal citation. Just a threat. I remember standing in my backyard that evening, looking up at the thin line of wire barely visible against the sky, and feeling a strange mix of frustration and unease. I had done everything right. I had followed the rules. I had the paperwork. I had the law on my side. But Darlene didn't care about any of that. She had decided the antenna offended her sense of order. And she wasn't done yet. The certified letters started arriving 2 weeks later. Thick envelopes stamped in red, like someone wanted them to feel heavier than they were. Each one demanded the same thing: remove the antenna within 30 days or face escalating penalties. The language was stiff, legal sounding, and clearly designed to intimidate. What stood out wasn't just the threat, but the confidence behind it. The assumption that I would fold the moment official-looking paper showed up in my mailbox. I didn't. I responded the same way every time, calmly, politely, and with documentation. I attached copies of the Architectural Committee's written approval. I included excerpts from federal statutes protecting licensed emergency communications. I added confirmation letters from emergency service coordinators acknowledging my role during outages and disasters. I made it impossible to claim ignorance. Her reply came less than 24 hours later. One sentence: HOA rules override personal excuses. That was it. No rebuttal. No reference to the documents I sent. No acknowledgement that she was wrong. Just dismissal. The fines began the following week. A small amount at first, but clearly designed to stack. Then another. Then another. Each notice included the same vague accusation about unauthorized structures and a warning that continued noncompliance would result in corrective action. At the same time, public notices started appearing on the HOA website. They didn't name me directly, but they didn't have to. Certain homeowners, the post said, were engaging in behavior that could negatively impact property values and introduce unnecessary risks. Neighbors were encouraged to report violations. Then came the emails. Darlene sent community-wide messages implying that my antenna posed a safety hazard. She suggested it could attract lightning. She hinted that it might interfere with household electronics. None of it was true, and none of it was backed by a single fact. Most people ignored it. A few neighbors asked me quietly if everything was okay. Some rolled their eyes and said she'd move on to a new target eventually. No one complained about the antenna. No one demanded it come down. No one cared, except Darlene. I tried again to de-escalate. I requested a formal meeting with the board. I offered to walk through the documentation in person. I even suggested bringing in a county emergency coordinator to explain, professionally and publicly, why the antenna existed, and what purpose it served. Every request was denied. She refused to meet. She refused mediation. She refused outside input. Instead, her language sharpened. One letter warned that the HOA reserved the right to remedy violations directly if homeowners fail to act. Another referenced self-help provisions, a phrase that caught my attention immediately. It was vague enough to be threatening without spelling anything out. That was when I stopped assuming incompetence. Up until then, I'd believed this was just a power-hungry board leader overreaching because no one had challenged her before. Annoying, yes. Stressful, definitely, but manageable. Now, it felt different. I started documenting everything more carefully. I saved emails as PDFs. I backed up letters. I labeled dates and times. I installed additional security cameras, not just on the house, but covering the yard where the antenna ran between the trees. I didn't announce any of it. Something about the way she wrote, the certainty, the refusal to engage, the constant implication that she could act unilaterally, made my instincts flare. This wasn't just about fines anymore. It was about enforcement, and she was getting impatient. The final letter arrived on a Friday afternoon. It stated that the violation remained unresolved and that the HOA would take appropriate action to ensure compliance. No timeline, no explanation. Just a signature at the bottom and a reminder that all costs incurred would be billed to me. I stood in my kitchen reading it twice, then a third time, feeling a tightness settle in my chest. Appropriate action could mean a lion. It could mean towing. It could mean legal action. Or it could mean something much worse. That evening, I walked out back and looked up at the antenna again. It was barely visible against the fading sky, doing exactly what it had always done, quietly listening, quietly standing by in case someone needed help when everything else failed. I realized then that Darlene wasn't just wrong. She was reckless. And the way she was escalating, dismissing law, ignoring documentation, hinting at self-help enforcement, wasn't just annoying anymore. It was dangerous. I didn't tell anyone when I added the cameras. I didn't announce it in emails. I didn't mention it to the board. I didn't even bring it up to neighbors I trusted. I just quietly expanded the coverage, making sure every angle of the backyard was visible, especially the stretch of ground beneath the pine trees where the antenna line ran. One camera covered the gate. Another watched the side yard. A third captured the roofline. Redundancy mattered. By then, my instincts were screaming that something was coming. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. The letters had stopped asking. The fines had stopped pretending to be corrective. And Darlene's language had shifted from bureaucratic to personal. She wasn't warning me anymore. She was laying groundwork. A few days later, Lena Brooks caught me while I was taking the trash out. She lived 2 houses down, the kind of neighbor who kept to herself but noticed everything. She didn't smile. She didn't waste time. She leaned in and lowered her voice. "I thought you should know," she said. Darlene was asking at the last board walk whether HOA leaders are allowed to remove violations themselves. My grip tightened on the trash can. "What do you mean, remove?" I asked. She said if a homeowner refuses to comply, the HOA shouldn't be forced to wait on courts. Lena replied. She used the words self-remedy, like it was already decided. I asked who else heard it. "Everyone," Lena said. Most of them just nodded. No one challenged her. I thanked her and watched her walk back to her house, the knot in my chest pulling tighter with every step. That night, I reviewed every document again: approval letters, email chains, federal guidance, emergency service confirmations. I organized them into folders. I created backups. I labeled dates and times. I printed hard copies and put them in a binder by the door. I also checked the cameras. Everything was quiet. For a few days, nothing happened. No new letters, no new fines, no emails. That silence was worse than the noise. It felt deliberate, like she was letting the pressure build before making her move. Then, on a perfectly normal weekday afternoon, my phone buzzed on my desk at work. At first, I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. I glanced down and saw the notification from my monitoring software. Loss of signal. Multiple channels offline. Automatic failover attempt unsuccessful. That shouldn't have been possible. I opened the app and watched the logs scroll. There was no gradual degradation. No weather interference. No power fluctuation. One moment the system was alive, steady, transmitting and receiving as it always did. The next moment it was gone. No storm warnings, no high winds, no lightning alerts, just a clean, sudden drop to zero. My heart started pounding. I pulled up the equipment diagnostics remotely. The transceiver was powered. The system was running. The problem wasn't inside the house. That left one explanation. I stood up so fast my chair skidded backward. I didn't bother telling my supervisor the details. I just said there was an emergency and grabbed my keys. The drive home felt longer than it ever had. Every red light felt personal. My thoughts raced ahead of me, replaying Darlene's letters, her phrasing, Lena's warning. Remove violations themselves. Appropriate action. Self-remedy. By the time I turned into Red Willow Ridge, my hands were shaking. The street looked normal, too normal. Kids' bikes leaned against driveways. Sprinklers ticked back and forth. Nothing looked out of place. I pulled into my driveway and didn't even shut the engine off. I ran straight through the house and out the back door. One glance was enough. The antenna line wasn't sagging. It wasn't tangled. It wasn't damaged by an animal or a falling branch. It was gone. The wire had been cut cleanly, right where it met the anchor point. The severed end lay coiled on the gravel, deliberate and unmistakable, like evidence someone wanted me to find. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, staring at the empty space between the trees where the line should have been. My ears rang with the same silence I'd seen in the logs. Then, behind me, I heard footsteps on the driveway. Slow, unhurried, and before I turned around, I already knew exactly who it was. I turned slowly, already bracing myself, and there she was. Darlene Huxley stood at the edge of my driveway like she'd been waiting for applause. She didn't look rushed or nervous. She looked satisfied. Behind her, leaning against the side of her SUV, was a folded ladder. On the ground near her feet sat a pair of heavy, duty wire cutters, still flecked with dirt and sap. She didn't deny anything. She didn't even pretend. "I took care of your violation," she said, crossing her arms. "You're welcome." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My eyes kept drifting past her to the backyard, to the empty space between the pine trees where the antenna should have been. Years of careful planning, paperwork, and service reduced to a coil of severed wire on the gravel. "You cut it," I finally said. She nodded, almost proudly. "You ignored multiple notices. The HOA has the right to enforce its rules when homeowners refuse to comply." I stepped past her and walked toward the backyard, my phone already in my hand. I took photos from every angle. The cut itself was clean, deliberate, not frayed, not torn. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. I zoomed in on the anchor point, the severed line, the way the cable had been tossed aside instead of left hanging. Behind me, Darlene followed, heels crunching on gravel. "I hope you don't think this is over," she said. "If you put it back up, I'll cut it again, as many times as it takes." That was when the shock gave way to clarity. I turned and looked her straight in the eye. "Darlene," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you didn't just violate HOA rules. You interfered with a federally licensed emergency communication system. That's not a civil issue. That's a federal offense." She laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncertain one. A genuine, dismissive laugh, like I'd just told her a bad joke. "This is a private community," she said. "Federal nonsense doesn't apply here. You hem guys always think you're special." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear, not anger, something worse. Certainty, I told her again. Slowly, exactly what the antenna was used for. I explained how the system logged disruptions automatically, how interference reports were tracked, how cutting a licensed antenna wasn't the same as trimming a hedge or removing a sign. She waved her hand like she was brushing away a fly. "Save it for your lawyer," she said. "The HOA handled the problem." End of story. I didn't argue after that. There was no point. People who laugh at laws don't listen to warnings. Instead, I did what I should have done the moment I saw the wire on the ground. I started documenting everything in real time. I recorded video. I photographed the ladder, the cutters, the cut line, the ground beneath it. I made sure to capture Darlene in frame as she spoke, as she confirmed she'd done it herself. She didn't try to stop me. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. "Make sure you get my good side," she said. "I want it clear the HOA isn't afraid to enforce standards." I asked her one final question, keeping my voice neutral. "You're saying on record that you personally cut a licensed antenna after being warned it was protected?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "And I'd do it again," I thanked her. That confused her. She frowned, clearly expecting anger, maybe threats. Instead, I walked back inside, closed the door, and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking now, but my mind was calm. The system logs had already captured the exact moment the signal went dead. The cameras had recorded her entering the yard with the ladder and leaving without the antenna. Her own words were on video, clear and unambiguous. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd sprinted past it. I backed up the footage immediately. Cloud storage, external drive, encrypted folder. I labeled everything with timestamps and descriptions. I saved copies of every email she'd sent over the past months, every fine notice, every vague threat about self-remedy. When I was done, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the severed wire lying outside the window. Darlene thought this was an HOA dispute. She thought this was about power, aesthetics, and who got the last word. What she didn't understand, what she laughed at, was that the moment she cut that antenna, she stopped being an HOA board leader dealing with a homeowner. She became someone who had interfered with federal emergency communications. And that was no longer something she could vote her way out of. Caleb Morris didn't hesitate when I called him. I explained everything from the beginning. The approvals, the letters, the fines, the warnings, the cameras, and finally the moment the antenna went dead. I sent him the footage while we were still on the phone. There was a long pause on his end as he watched it. Then he said, very calmly, "You're done dealing with the HOA. We're escalating this." He instructed me to file a formal interference complaint with the Federal Communications Commission that same evening. Not a summary, not a narrative, a full submission with attachments, timestamps, logs, and sworn statements. He walked me through exactly how to format it, what language to use, and what statutes to cite. He emphasized one thing over and over: stick to facts. Let the evidence talk. By the time I finished uploading everything, it was past midnight. I didn't expect anything to happen quickly. Federal agencies don't move fast, especially on paperwork. I was wrong. Less than 48 hours later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end introduced himself as Special Agent Thomas Reed with the Federal Communications Commission. He asked if he could come by that afternoon. When his unmarked government vehicle pulled into my driveway, it felt surreal. He wasn't flashy, no sirens, no drama. Just a calm, professional presence that immediately changed the atmosphere of the street. He carried a slim briefcase and wore a jacket with an FCC badge clipped neatly to the inside. We sat at my kitchen table for nearly 2 hours. I showed him everything. The architectural approvals, the email chains, the certified letters, the fines, the video footage from multiple angles, the system logs showing the exact second the signal dropped. I played the audio where Darlene admitted cutting the antenna and threatened to do it again. Agent Reed didn't interrupt. He took notes. He asked precise questions: dates, times, distances, whether anyone else had access to the yard, whether I had ever given permission for entry. When I finished, he closed his notebook and looked up at me. "This is one of the clearest cases of willful interference I've seen," he said. "There's no ambiguity here." A hearing that sent a wave of relief through me. I hadn't realized I was holding back. Then he asked, "Where is she?" I told him Darlene was usually home during the day. He nodded once and stood. "I'd like to speak with her." We walked outside together. A few neighbors watched from their windows, curiosity flickering behind curtains. Agent Reed didn't rush. He knocked on Darlene's door like any normal visitor. She opened it with a tight smile that vanished the moment she saw the badge. "What is this?" she demanded. Agent Reed introduced himself and explained why he was there. He told her, plainly and professionally, that he was investigating a reported case of interference with licensed emergency communications. She scoffed. "This is an HOA matter," she said. "You have no jurisdiction here." Agent Reed remained calm. He explained federal authority. He explained that licensed communications were protected regardless of HOA boundaries. He explained the seriousness of intentional interference. Darlene crossed her arms and laughed. "I don't care what your rules say," she snapped. "This is private property governed by HOA bylaws. Federal law doesn't apply inside my community." Agent Reed asked her one simple question. "Did you personally cut the antenna?" "Les," she said without hesitation. "And I'd do it again." He asked if she had been warned it was federally protected. "Yes," she replied. He was trying to scare me. Every word was recorded. At one point, she insulted him directly, calling the FCC joke agency and accusing him of bullying homeowners. She told him he should be ashamed for siding with someone who destroyed property values. He didn't react. He simply documented. When the conversation ended, Agent Reed thanked her for her time and walked back toward me. Darlene stood in her doorway, arms crossed, wearing the same confident expression she'd had since the beginning. As soon as we were out of earshot, Agent Reed spoke quietly. "She's made this very easy." He explained what would happen next. The case would be forwarded with his findings. The documentation was airtight. Her admissions alone removed any plausible deniability. Before he left, he turned to me and said something I won't forget. "People like her confuse authority with immunity. They think titles protect them." He handed me his card. "They don't." As his vehicle pulled away, I looked back at Darlene's house. She was still standing there, watching, convinced she'd just won another argument. She had no idea that the moment she laughed at federal law, the situation stopped being about HOA rules altogether. From that point on, it was no longer a dispute. It was a case. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, the kind that makes you feel the walls are closing in. Tension crackled through the room like static. Darlene was already spiraling, her emails growing wilder by the hour, accusing the federal government of harassment, claiming they were targeting her personally. Her paranoia was no longer contained. It leaked into every thread, every notice, every conversation. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. No one wanted to touch the chaos she was creating, and slowly, one by one, they backed away. Her isolation was complete. By the end of the meeting, It was clear Darlene could no longer hold her position. The vote was swift, almost clinical. She was removed immediately, her authority evaporating in an instant. The board wasted no time referring the matter to federal prosecutors. Charges were filed, a legal noose forming around her erratic behavior, leaving her rambling claims to crumble under scrutiny. The power she wielded like a sledgehammer was suddenly gone, leaving only her hysteria exposed to the world. Just as the dust seemed to settle, the region was struck by a wildfire. Flames raced across dry hills and cell service went down, leaving panic in its wake. I knew the station I had restored, the one everyone had laughed at before, was the difference between order and chaos. I broadcast critical evacuation information, coordinating with local authorities, guiding residents safely out of harm's way. People who had once ignored me were now listening intently, grateful, even relieved. The station hummed with purpose, every message cutting through the smoke and confusion like a lifeline. Local news caught wind of it, reporters rushing to cover the story of how a single person had become a vital link in a regional emergency. Amidst the chaos, Darlene's claims about just a wire, controlling everything and threatening the community, died in the public eye. No longer was it about bureaucracy or small town squabbles, it was about tangible action, about real people saving lives. Her arguments, once laced with authority and intimidation, seemed absurd when compared to the lives actually being protected. The wildfire raged on, but the community, guided by clear communication and calm leadership, managed to evacuate efficiently. Neighbors helped one another, sharing fuel, water, and safe routes. My restored station became a hub of information, relief, and reassurance. It wasn't just a radio, it was a testament to preparation, patience, and persistence. Every transmission reminded the community that true power isn't wielded through fear, it's earned by action. Meanwhile, Darlene watched from her isolation, cut off from both authority and influence. The board that once followed her orders had not only rejected her, but had embraced accountability, transparency, and efficiency. Her removal, once feared as a disaster for the HOA, had opened space for reason, competence, and leadership that actually served the residents. Federal authorities handled her filings, exposing the gaps and fabrications in her claims, leaving her scrambling for relevance. The wildfire eventually burned itself out, but the lessons lingered. My station, rebuilt and operational, remained a symbol of resilience and preparedness. Neighbors came forward to thank me personally, recounting moments when they had relied on the information I broadcast. The story of Darlene's collapse became almost mythic in local circles, a cautionary tale about ego, unchecked authority, and the inevitability of accountability. In the end, the HOA wasn't just legally neutralized, it was publicly humiliated. Darlene's grand proclamations and threats had dissolved under the weight of real, world crisis. While she had tried to twist fear into power, the community had seen the difference between words and action, intimidation and protection. My role, once minor, had become central. The station that was once just a wire had become a lifeline, a reminder that competence, courage, and preparation always outlast arrogance. Quietly, the neighborhood began to rebuild, not just homes and fences, but trust, confidence, and shared responsibility. People laughed again, exchanged greetings, and helped each other in small, tangible ways. The shadow of the HOA had lifted, replaced by a sense of safety and control. And while Darlene's story would be told for years as a tale of caution, my community had discovered something far more valuable: resilience, unity, and the power of action when it mattered most. No laws, no meetings, no threats, just preparation, clarity, and decisive steps. The collapse of Darlene's reign marked the turning point, not just legally, but culturally. Residents remembered the fear, yes, but also the clarity that followed when authority is abused, When ego overtakes reason, real-world consequences catch up, and in that vacuum, courage and competence shine. By the time the smoke cleared, both literally and figuratively, the neighborhood was stronger than ever. And as for Darlene, she became a footnote in local lore, a warning of what happens when control is sought through panic and deception, rather than earned through service and foresight. Would you like me to expand this into a full 700 to 900 word version with more sensory details and dialogue to match the HOA1 cinematic style? The court case began quietly, almost deceptively so. The judge called the first hearing, and the room hummed with anticipation. Darlene arrived, still brimming with bluster, convinced she could talk her way out. She brought her usual stack of papers, proclamations, and frantic arguments, but it didn't take long for reality to intrude. The prosecution presented video evidence first. Every threatening email, every unauthorized inspection, every confrontation caught on tape was laid bare. There was no room to deny what the cameras and recordings showed. The silence in the courtroom was almost tangible as each clip played. Her confident assertions faltered with every frame. When asked to explain, her words tangled in contradictions, each explanation undercut by the next undeniable piece of footage. Then came the emails. Federal investigators had collected them meticulously. Lines that once seemed like harmless complaints now revealed intent, manipulation, and harassment. The documents painted a clear picture of someone abusing authority, not someone protecting a community. The judge and jury watched as Darlene attempted to spin them into plausible deniability, but the pattern was unmistakable. Finally, federal testimony sealed the case. Witnesses spoke clearly about the repeated threats, the forged approvals, and the attempts to intimidate residents. Experts explained the legal framework Darlene had tried to exploit, how her actions violated both federal and local statutes. Even the board members who had once followed her were called, recounting the fear and pressure she had exerted. By the end of the testimony, her defense had crumbled entirely. The verdict was swift, guilty. The weight of the room seemed to lift at once, a collective exhale of relief and vindication. Justice had been served, not through spectacle, but through evidence and meticulous documentation. Darlene's authority evaporated completely. Her attempts to twist fear into power were now permanently nullified by the law and public record. In the aftermath, the HOA began a transformation. The board, now composed of more responsible and reasonable members, rewrote its rules from top to bottom. Transparency, accountability, and resident protections became the new foundation. Formal apologies were issued to the community, acknowledging the fear and confusion Darlene had caused. Her reign of intimidation became an example of what failure looks like when authority is abused. Meanwhile, I turned my attention back to the station. The antenna I had previously installed was now reinstated, upgraded, and legally protected. Every wire, every connection, every transmission point was now stronger than before, secured under county regulation. It wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was a symbol of resilience, preparation, and legitimacy. What had once been dismissed as just a wire had become a recognized instrument of public safety. The county noticed. Officials asked me to serve as the county emergency communications coordinator, a role I accepted with quiet satisfaction. Suddenly, what had started as a personal defense against a small-town HOA had grown into something far bigger, a responsibility to safeguard lives and information on a regional scale. The recognition wasn't about power. It was about trust, competence, and the ability to act when it mattered most. Neighbors came forward to share their gratitude. They recounted moments when the station had provided critical updates during the wildfire, when they had relied on clear, timely communication to stay safe. The community that had once been fractured by fear and uncertainty now felt unified. People understood the value of preparation, transparency, and taking action when rules fail. Darlene faded from public view, her attempts at control and intimidation reduced to cautionary tales. Her emails, videos, and courtroom testimony became reference points in training sessions for local boards and emergency coordinators, a study in what not to do when wielding authority. Her story was preserved, but only as a reminder that transparency, courage, and documentation always prevail over unchecked power. The neighborhood itself thrived. Meetings became collaborative, solutions-focused gatherings instead of arenas for threats and spectacle. Residents felt empowered to question decisions, knowing that competence and evidence carried weight, not fear or manipulation. Trust was rebuilt gradually, but it was stronger for having been tested. Looking back, the entire ordeal had revealed the fragile nature of authority when challenged by preparation and clarity. What had started as harassment from an overreaching HOA member had ended in a restructured community, a legally reinforced communications system, and a recognized role in county emergency management. The chain of events proved that responsibility, action, and foresight are more enduring than intimidation and ego. By the time the dust settled, both legally and socially, the neighborhood was safer, stronger, and more connected than ever. The station continued to broadcast vital updates, residents continued to support one another, and the county had a reliable, experienced coordinator ready for any emergency. What had been a local conflict had grown into a legacy of resilience, proving that one person's initiative, when grounded in evidence and principle, could make a lasting difference. If you want, I can also rewrite this Part 8 in the full '01 cinematic, high-retention style with punchy sentences, escalating tension, and immersive dialogue to match the previous story beats. It would hit 700 to 900 words perfectly. Do you want me to do that? I've had time to reflect, and the truth is clear: HOA power is fragile. Paper authority can feel absolute until it collides with real law. Darlene strutted around like titles made her untouchable, but she forgot one key fact: jurisdiction matters. Rules on a sheet of paper don't override accountability, evidence, or common sense. The antenna still stands, quieter now, stronger, and fully backed by the very community she tried to dismiss. It hums with purpose, a silent reminder that preparation and legitimacy always outlast ego. The neighborhood has returned to peace. People smile, share waves, and check in on one another again without the shadow of fear looming overhead. Every time I hear my radio crackle during an emergency, I remember how close a single ego came to silencing something that mattered. It's a lesson I carry. Authority is only as strong as the law and the people who uphold it. Complacency gives power to the reckless. Action and clarity reclaim it. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?